The autumn wind slipped through the ancient oaks, stirring the last of their golden leaves and sending them tumbling across the damp pathways of Memorial Garden Cemetery. Jackson Hayes adjusted the collar of his cashmere coat and slowed his steps, as the marble headstone came into view. For 10 years he had made this pilgrimage, once each year on this same gray October afternoon. And for 10 years the ritual had stripped away every layer of armor he'd built as a billionaire, a negotiator, a man accustomed to power. Here, in this silent corner where her name was etched in stone, he was not the ruthless founder of a tech empire. He was simply a man who had loved and lost. He carried a single white rose. It was always the same flower, never more, never less. He placed it gently against the base of the headstone, fingers brushing the engraved letters as though they might warm to his touch. Eleanor Porter, 1989-2017. Beloved mother and daughter. The words had never mentioned him, never hinted at the years of brilliance and laughter they had shared before she vanished from his world. His throat tightened. "Another year without answers," he whispered. His voice cracked against the silence, and the wind scattered the confession into the trees. It was then he heard it, a soft, fragile sound that did not belong to the whisper of leaves or the distant rumble of traffic. A whimper, barely audible, carried on the chill breeze. Jackson straightened, his steel-blue eyes scanning the rows of weathered stones until they caught on movement near Eleanor's grave. Two small figures huddled together on the damp ground, their coats thin against the cold. They were children, no more than 8 years old, mirror images of one another with golden curls tumbling over tear-streaked faces. Jackson's pulse quickened. He should have looked away, allowed them their privacy, but he couldn't. Their presence felt like an intrusion into the sacred grief he thought belonged to him alone. Yet something rooted him in place. "Mommy's still alive. I know she is." The words came fierce and certain from one of the girls, her little hand tracing the carved letters of Eleanor's name. Jackson froze. The sentence struck like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Alive. The word reverberated in his skull, stirring thoughts he had long buried. His heart pounded as the second girl spoke, her voice breaking into sobs. "Emma, the social worker said we have to accept it. We have to. But I don't want to," the first replied, her voice trembling but defiant. "They're wrong, Olivia. I feel her. I still feel her." Jackson stepped forward before reason could stop him, gravel crunching under his shoes. The girls' heads snapped up, their wide eyes glimmering with alarm that quickly softened into curiosity. Something about their gaze unsettled him deeply. The shape of their eyes, the determined tilt of their chins, the fire in their small voices. It all felt unnervingly familiar. "I'm sorry," he said gently, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "I didn't mean to startle you." His voice carried a warmth that surprised even him. I knew Eleanor." The name fell between them like a spark. The girls exchanged a glance, a silent communication so swift and instinctive it reminded him of a code only they understood. Hope lit their faces. "You knew our mom?" asked the one called Emma, her words sharp with sudden need. Jackson swallowed, lowering himself to their level despite the damp ground soaking into the knees of his tailored suit. "I did," he said quietly, almost reverently. "A long time ago." Olivia wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve, her eyes wide with suspicion and something else, yearning. "No one believes us," she said suddenly. Her fists clenched. "No one believes she's still out there." The weight of her small voice pressed against Jackson's chest. He looked from one girl to the other, and the realization crept in like dawn breaking over a long, dark horizon. There was more to Eleanor's story than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. These children, with their unwavering faith, their mirrored faces, their conviction, Why did they stir something in him he thought long dead? "I'll believe you," he heard himself say, the words escaping before he could think. Both girls froze, their eyes widening as though he had offered them sunlight after years of darkness. "You will?" Olivia whispered. Jackson nodded, an unspoken promise forming in the air between them. "I will. Tell me why you think your mother is still alive." The first fragile rays of hope broke across their faces. In that instant, something fundamental shifted inside Jackson Hayes. For the first time in a decade, grief gave way to something far more dangerous and far more powerful, a spark of belief. The wind carried the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves as Jackson remained crouched before the twin girls. Their hopeful faces burned into his vision long after they rose and drifted away with the woman who had come to fetch them. He stood there in the cemetery long after they had gone, his body rooted like the old oaks above him. His mind, however, would not stay still. It dragged him back through years he had worked tirelessly to bury beneath layers of success, distraction, and the relentless climb toward wealth. Eleanor. He whispered her name once, tasting its sharpness on his tongue like a forbidden word. She had been the first person who ever saw through his defenses, back in the fluorescent-lit labs of MIT. He could picture it as vividly as though he were still there. The cluttered tables, the acrid smell of solder, the hum of overworked fans. He remembered the night she leaned over his shoulder, her dark hair falling loose as she corrected the flaw in his algorithm with one swift adjustment. He'd been furious at first, then astonished. That was the moment she became a permanent fixture in his life. He had been arrogant, brimming with ideas and determination, yet she challenged him without fear. She was fearless in everything, in her work, in her laughter, in the way she made him believe he was more than just another boy with clever hands and ambition. He had thought they were unstoppable together, a partnership of mind and spirit. Until one day, she was gone. He pressed his fingers against his eyes, trying to push away the images. The twins had reignited everything. Their voices, so sure, so fierce, echoed like Eleanor's own when she used to stand in front of him, her chin lifted in defiance, daring him to give up on something he believed in. He had forgotten that look, but in Emma's small face, he had seen it again. Jackson left the cemetery, the city rising around him as he walked without direction. The skyscrapers glinted coldly in the fading light, steel and glass monuments he had helped shape. Yet as he passed them, a gnawing hollowness spread inside him. What had any of it meant? 10 years of building an empire, of cutting deals and accumulating wealth, all to fill the cavern left when she disappeared. He had convinced himself money was enough, that control and power could soothe wounds left by love abandoned. But today, in the simple defiance of two small girls, that illusion had cracked wide open. At a red light, he caught his own reflection in a shop window. Sharp suit, immaculate tie, a face that graced magazine covers. Yet behind the surface, he saw the weariness, the loneliness. His mother used to tell him his eyes gave him away, that no matter how hard he tried, they would always reveal what his heart carried. And when he thought of the girl's eyes, so startlingly like his own, the breath caught in his throat. Could they really be his? Could Eleanor have kept such a truth from him? He remembered her sudden departure, the unanswered calls, the letter that never came. He had been certain she chose to leave him behind for reasons he could never accept. But now the possibilities clawed at him. Betrayal, fear, manipulation. And that photograph, the one Emma had shown him, pulled him back to those days of possibility, where their lives were entwined with laughter, with plans, with the stubborn belief that they would change the world together. The limousine waited, where he always left it, But instead of stepping inside, Jackson lingered on the pavement, his coat pulled tight against the chill. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not about quarterly earnings or new contracts. They were consumed by the twins, by Eleanor, by the mystery that had never truly let him go. When the driver opened the door, Jackson slid inside and sat in silence as the car carried him through the city. His hand clenched around the memory of the white rose he had left on the grave. Grief had been his companion for a decade, but now another companion stirred, suspicion. Perhaps Eleanor hadn't abandoned him. Perhaps she had been taken from him in ways he could not yet see. And, perhaps against all odds, the twins were right. The little bell above the cafe door chimed softly as Jackson pushed it open, holding the door long enough for the two girls and the woman who accompanied them to slip inside ahead of him. The warmth of the place washed over him, a stark contrast to the chill gray afternoon beyond the glass. The cafe was modest, its wooden tables scarred by years of use, the air rich with the scent of roasted beans and cinnamon. It was the sort of place Eleanor might have loved, he thought, unpretentious, filled with the hum of quiet conversations. The girls moved cautiously, as though aware they did not quite belong in the polished world of the city. Their coats were faded, their shoes worn. They sat together at a corner table, heads bent toward each other in a whisper only twins could understand. Jackson watched them for a moment before following the woman, who extended her hand with a practiced smile. "Martha Wilson," she said. "I'm their temporary guardian. I work with family services." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were wary. She had seen too many wealthy men step briefly into children's lives for appearance's sake, then retreat when the responsibility became inconvenient. Jackson shook her hand, though his gaze never left the girls. "They've been through a great deal since their mother's accident last year," Martha continued, lowering her voice. "The foster system hasn't been easy. They're brilliant like she apparently was, but they cling to this belief that she's still alive." Jackson's jaw tightened. He had no intention of dismissing the girl's words as a child's fantasy, not after what he had felt at the cemetery. He crossed to their table, the soft carpet muffling his steps. "Would you mind if I sat with you?" he asked. Emma studied him with eyes far older than her years, then gave the smallest of nods. Olivia, her cheeks still pink from the cold, slid, her cocoa mug closer to her chest, and simply watched him. He lowered himself into the chair across from them, the tailored fabric of his suit creasing against the wooden edge. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then quietly, he said, "Tell me about your mother." It was Olivia who broke first, her voice small but certain. "She was a scientist. She worked with medicines to help people. She always had her notebook with her, the one with the lock." Emma added quickly, "She was different before the accident, nervous. She whispered on the phone at night. She thought we were asleep, but we heard. She said people were dangerous." Jackson leaned forward, his pulse hammering. "What did she say exactly?" "That she had proof," Emma replied, her words steady, though her small fingers twisted, in her lap. "Proof that people could get hurt. She wanted to tell someone important." Martha let out a sigh, shaking her head as if to soften their claims. "The police investigated. There was nothing suspicious." "Because they didn't look," Olivia cut in fiercely. Her small hands clenched around her mug. "Mom left us clues. She knew something might happen." Emma reached into her coat pocket then, pulling out a folded photograph. She smoothed it on the table with great care before sliding it across to him. "She said if anything happened, we should remember this picture." Jackson's hand trembled as he picked it up. The breath caught in his throat. There he was, younger, laughing, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders on a bright afternoon at MIT. He remembered that day vividly, remembered the sunlight on her hair, the way she teased him for squinting in photos. The girls watched him closely, their expressions caught between hope and fear. "That's you," Emma said simply. Jackson struggled to speak. The weight of the photograph was heavier than gold. Martha's brows furrowed, her suspicion plain. "You knew Eleanor well," she said, not as a question but as a challenge. He nodded once, his voice thick. "We were together in college. We lost touch. Years ago." The twins exchanged another silent glance. Olivia's voice softened. "Mom?" "Never told us much about our dad. Just that he was someone important. Too important to be with us." Jackson's chest ached as he looked at their small, determined faces. The truth pressed against him, undeniable. Their eyes, their expressions, even their stubborn defiance. He saw himself in every line. He forced a slow breath, steadying himself against the rush of emotions. "Your mother," he said, his gaze lingering on the photograph, "was the most brilliant person I've ever known." He looked up, meeting their eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt the fragile beginnings of something he thought had been buried forever. A connection, a responsibility, a family, just beyond his reach. Rain streaked the windows of Jackson's penthouse as the city lights began to flicker awake beneath the gray dusk. The twins sat curled together on a leather sofa that seemed far too large for their small frames, their eyes darting around it, the towering shelves of books and sleek technology that filled the room. Olivia pressed her nose to the glass wall, marveling at the endless sprawl of the skyline, while Emma clutched a worn backpack against her chest like a treasure she was, afraid might be stolen. Jackson paced the floor, his mind restless. He could feel the weight of the photograph Emma had shown him at the cafe still burning in his pocket. Proof of a past he'd buried. Proof of a love he'd convinced himself had died with Eleanor. And now, these girls, her daughters, his daughters. The thought still came with a shock every time it surfaced. Emma finally shifted on the sofa, her serious eyes locked on him. "We have something," she said quietly, as if testing whether she could trust him. She unzipped the backpack with careful fingers and drew out a small leather-bound book. It was old, its edges worn smooth by use, its cover scarred by faint scratches. At its clasp gleamed a lock unlike any Jackson had seen before. A puzzle of interlocking rings and shifting shapes, mechanical rather than digital. "This was Mom's," Emma explained. "She said it was her special notebook. We tried to open it, but it's too hard." Olivia hugged her knees to her chest, her wide eyes shining. "She told us that people's lives might depend on what was inside. That if something happened, to her this book would keep us safe." Jackson sank onto the coffee table in front of them, his breath caught in his throat. He reached for the notebook with reverence, the way one might lift a relic. The lock was heavy beneath his fingers, cold metal intricate with tiny notches and grooves. He rotated one of the rings, and it clicked faintly, as though acknowledging his touch. "This isn't just a lock," he murmured. "It's a cipher, a puzzle only someone who understands the pattern could solve." The twins exchanged a look, that silent communication that seemed as natural to them as breathing. Emma nodded. "Mom was always making puzzles. She said the most important things have to be hidden in plain sight." Jackson rose and crossed to his desk, reaching for his phone. He knew exactly who he needed. Within an hour, Camila Rodriguez arrived, rain dripping from her dark coat. She was sharp-eyed, calm, the kind of woman who carried with her the scent of old secrets. A former intelligence operative, now head of his security, Camila had cracked codes Jackson would never have imagined existed. She studied the notebook in silence, turning it over with careful hands. "This is unusual," she said finally. "Reminds me of Cold War encryption tools. It's designed to resist brute force. Whoever made this wanted to make sure only the right person could unlock it." "Can you do it?" Jackson asked. Camilla's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "With time, and a lot of patience." She set to work immediately, spreading tools across the coffee table. The twins hovered close, watching intently as she manipulated the rings, listening for the subtle clicks. Jackson stepped back, letting them watch. His gaze drifted from the notebook to the girls themselves. They leaned into each other, breathing in rhythm, their faith unshaken. He envied that faith. Once, Eleanor had carried that same conviction, that certainty in her eyes when she spoke of what was right, what was worth fighting for. He realized, standing there, that he had missed more than just Eleanor in the years since her death. He had missed the fire she ignited in him. And now, somehow, that fire burned in these girls. Hours passed before Camilla finally straightened, her fingers pausing on the final adjustment. A soft, satisfying click broke the silence. The lock released, the notebook opening with a sigh as though it had been waiting for this moment. The first pages were filled with neat chemical diagrams, molecular chains, scientific data that sprawled across the paper in Eleanor's familiar hand. Jackson's stomach knotted. He couldn't fully grasp the meaning, but he knew enough to recognize that these were formulas not meant for the casual eye. He turned further, and her handwriting shifted from technical precision to hurried journal entries. March 12th. The trial. Data doesn't match what was submitted to the FDA. Patient deaths were recategorized. Neurolin is dangerous. But Bennett altered the reports. Jackson's breath caught. He turned the page, his eyes moving quickly. March 20th. Cardiac abnormalities in 18% of patients, not the 2% reported. Bennett ordered these findings removed. He knows I've been digging. I fear for the girls. His hand trembled. The room fell silent, except for the twins' quiet breathing. Emma leaned forward, her voice steady though her eyes betrayed fear. She was right, wasn't she? She found something bad. Jackson closed the notebook gently, his jaw tightening. Yes, and whatever it was, it's why she died, or why they made it look that way. The storm outside beat harder against the glass, as if echoing the storm that now raged within him. The truth was breaking through the cracks, and with it came a chilling certainty. Eleanor had not just stumbled onto dangerous ground. She had been standing against something vast, something ruthless, and now, because of that, the danger had shifted to him, to Emma and Olivia. He looked at the twins, their faces pale but determined, and for the first time in years he felt the old vow rise unbidden in his chest. He would not let them take anything. More from Eleanor. Not her work, not her children, not the truth. The city was wrapped in evening haze when Jackson's private elevator chimed softly and opened to reveal the man he least wanted to see. Maxwell Bennett stepped inside without hesitation, as though the penthouse belonged to him, the faint scent of expensive cologne and cold authority trailing in with him. At 60, silver hair swept perfectly into place, he looked every inch the celebrated titan of pharmaceuticals, but Jackson could see the sharper edges beneath, the predator that had shaped so much of his past. Bennett's smile was polite, practiced, the kind designed to disarm boardrooms. Jackson, he said smoothly, his voice warm enough to fool anyone who hadn't grown up in its shadow. It's been far too long. Jackson didn't rise from where he sat, the leather notebook lying closed on the table before him. He kept his tone neutral, measured. What do you want, Maxwell? Can an old mentor not pay a visit? Bennett's eyes roamed the penthouse, lingering on the children's shoes neatly tucked by the door, on the pair of mugs abandoned on the counter. His smile never wavered, but his gaze sharpened. I hear you've taken in Eleanor Porter's girls. Quite the generous act. The words slid like a blade cloaked in silk. Jackson stood, slowly, deliberately. They needed someone. I'm sure you know how that feels, being needed. Of course, Bennett replied, the faintest flicker of something, irritation, perhaps, crossing his face. He stepped closer to the window. the city's neon glow reflecting off his polished shoes. Children need stability, Hayes. They need structure, protection. Do you really think your life, your empire of gadgets and algorithms, is the right place for them? Jackson's jaw clenched. I'll handle their needs. Bennett turned then, his gaze locking onto Jackson's with a predator's patience. I wonder, he said lightly, whether social services would agree. You see, connections run deep in this city. Judges, caseworkers, regulators, all people I happen to know quite well. If those girls remain in uncertain hands, it could become complicated. The threat was veiled, but the meaning rang clear. Jackson took a slow breath, fighting the urge to lunge across the room. For years he had admired this man, once believed his guidance had been what launched him forward, after Eleanor disappeared. But now, seeing him here, the mask slipping, the truth clawed through the illusion. You always admired Eleanor's mind, didn't you? Jackson asked quietly. Something flickered in Bennett's eyes, there and gone in a second. She was brilliant, he admitted, voice silk wrapped around iron. Brilliant but reckless. She needed someone to keep her in line. And when she wouldn't fall in line, Jackson pressed. Bennett's smile thinned. Accidents happen. Ambition outruns caution. You, of all people, know how unforgiving progress can be. Jackson stepped forward, closing the space between them. The air felt charged, the city humming, below like a storm waiting to break. If you've come here to intimidate me, you've wasted your time. For a moment, the facade slipped, and Bennett's eyes burned with unveiled threat. Then, just as quickly, the mask returned. He smoothed his cufflink, adjusted his tie. Be careful, Jackson. Parenting is hazardous work. Children are delicate. The elevator doors opened at his back. He turned, stepped inside, and with a final glance, half smirk, half warning, he was gone. Jackson remained where he stood, fists clenched at his sides, heart pounding. In the guest room down the hall, he could hear faint laughter, the twins whispering to each other, safe for now, unaware of the shadow that had just walked out of their lives but not away. He moved to the table, resting a hand on the leather-bound notebook, its weight both anchor and weapon. For the first time in a decade, his war was no longer against his own grief. It was against Maxwell Bennett, against everything the man had built, against the lies that had cost Eleanor her freedom, or her life. Jackson had spent 10 years climbing toward wealth and power, with no higher purpose than proving himself. Tonight, as the storm gathered around his heart, he understood he was no longer building for himself at all. He was fighting for two girls who carried Eleanor's fire in their veins, and he would not let Bennett take them. The morning was gray and heavy with mist when Jackson stepped from the black car at Memorial Garden Cemetery once again. This time, he wasn't alone. Detective Marcus Lewis stood beside him, a tall, weathered man whose sharp eyes took in every detail as though the cemetery itself were holding secrets. A court order had been fought for, pressed through layers of bureaucracy, and now men in dark coats prepared to dig. The ground smelled of rain and old earth, the silence of the place broken only by the groan of shovels cutting into the soil. Jackson's throat tightened as he stared at the headstone he had visited every year, the one he had whispered to as though she were listening. For 10 years he had believed Eleanor's body rested here, that beneath the marble and earth lay the woman he had loved. Now he knew that might not be true, and the uncertainty unsettled him more than grief ever had. Detective Lewis glanced at him. I'll warn you now, if this goes the way I think it will, there's no turning back. Jackson gave a short nod, his jaw set. I don't want to turn back. The workers dug steadily, the scrape of shovels ringing louder than any sound had a right to in a place meant for silence. Finally, the wooden edges of a coffin appeared through the soil. The men worked with careful precision, ropes straining, as the casket was lifted free and placed on a platform beneath a canvas tent. The air seemed to still, the mist thickening as though the earth itself waited to see what would be revealed. Dr. Helena Bishop, the state's most respected forensic pathologist, approached the casket with calm efficiency. She adjusted her gloves, her gaze steady as she photographed the seals, ran her fingers over the edges, checked for tampering. "It's intact," she said, more to the recorders than to them. Then, with a small nod, she signaled to her assistant. The lid creaked as it was pried open. Jackson's breath hitched. He braced himself for what he thought he wanted: confirmation, a body, the cold end to years of speculation. But what he saw stole the strength from his legs. Inside the coffin, there was no Eleanor, no remains, no trace of the woman whose name he had whispered to each year. Only sandbags, stacked and arranged in a crude approximation of weight, filling the space where she should have been. "What the hell?" Lewis muttered, stepping closer. His face hardened as he scanned the contents. "This casket never held a body." Dr. Bishop bent low, her hands moving carefully. "These bags are old but undisturbed. There are no biological traces, no decomposition staining. This coffin was staged from the start." She straightened, pulling off her gloves. "Whoever orchestrated this wanted everyone to believe a body lay here, and knew no one would ever check." The world tilted under Jackson's feet. For 10 years, he had mourned at a grave that was nothing but theater. His fingers dug into his coat pocket where the photograph still rested, the one of him and Eleanor laughing long ago. His heart thudded with a terrible, breathtaking possibility. She hadn't died. She had been hidden. Behind him, Diana Chen, the investigative reporter who had insisted on witnessing the exhumation, scribbled furiously into her notebook. "A closed casket funeral, a body declared too burned to identify," she said aloud. This was never about closure. It was about erasing her. Jackson's pulse roared in his ears. He imagined Eleanor, terrified, forced into silence. He imagined the twins, left behind with no explanation, their conviction dismissed as childish denial. And he imagined Bennett, smooth smile in place, ensuring every official line read the way he wanted it to. Lewis closed the lid with finality. "We'll need to retest everything from the accident. Blood samples, DNA reports, all of it. But I can already tell you this was staged." Jackson turned away, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Mist curled around his shoes as he looked once more at the headstone. For a decade, he had spoken to it as though Eleanor could hear him. Now he realized he had been speaking into a lie. Back at the penthouse, the twins waited, perched on the edge of the sofa, when he returned. Their eyes searched his face the instant he walked in. Emma spoke first, her voice calm but edged with expectation. "You went to Mom's grave." Jackson knelt in front of them, the words hard to form. "Yes," he said, "but we didn't find her." Olivia's eyes widened, a spark of fierce triumph flashing across her face. "Because she wasn't there." "Exactly," Jackson said softly. He looked at them both, their small faces lit with a hope he had once thought cruel to encourage. "I don't know where she is yet, but I believe you now. I believe your mother may still be alive." Emma's hands clenched in her lap, her composure firm, though her voice betrayed the quiver of emotion beneath. "Then we have to find her." "We can't stop now." The mist of the cemetery clung to him still, cold and damp, but inside, fire stirred. Jackson Hayes, who had once thought grief his greatest enemy, now had a new purpose. He would uncover the truth of Eleanor's disappearance. And if she was alive, as the girls had always claimed, nothing and no one would keep him from bringing her home. Night settled over the city like a heavy curtain, the glow of skyscraper windows flickering against the low clouds. Jackson sat in his study with the notebook spread open before him, Eleanor's hurried handwriting crowding the margins. Every page he turned deepened the chill in his chest. Data falsified, deaths hidden, threats implied. Yet the final entries were different, filled with cryptic symbols and strange diagrams that looked less like chemical structures and more like maps of thought, a code within the code. He rubbed a hand across his face, exhaustion battling the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Emma padded softly into the room, her small figure haloed by the hall light. She carried the same solemnity as her mother once did, that air of someone far older than her years. "You're still reading," she said, climbing onto the chair beside him without waiting for permission. Her eyes drifted to the pages. "Mom used to write like that when she didn't want anyone else to understand." Jackson looked at her, startled. "You've seen her write these symbols before?" Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the notebook. "In the last weeks before the accident." She stayed up late, her door closed. I'd peek through the crack and see her filling page after page. She was scared, but she never stopped writing. She told us sometimes the truth had to be hidden where only the right eyes could find it. Her voice wavered, but then her expression shifted, becoming intent, almost eerie in its calm. "I've been dreaming about her. She's in a white room, no windows, no door, just white walls and a desk. She keeps working, writing notes and hiding them in her shoes. She looks tired, but she keeps going." The words sent a shiver down Jackson's spine. He wanted to dismiss it as a child's imagination, but something in Emma's voice was too precise, too sharp. He remembered Eleanor's last entries. "Victoria watching me constantly. Must protect the girls." Could Emma's dreams be more than dreams? A memory she'd overheard? A fragment of something real that her young mind transformed into visions? Before he could ask more, the security system chimed softly. Camilla's voice echoed from the intercom. "Mr. Hayes, we have a visitor. Sarah Wong. Says she was Eleanor's research assistant." Moments later, Sarah stepped into the study, a slight woman with anxious eyes that darted toward every shadow. The twins ran to her instantly, their embrace erasing any doubt about her identity. "You've grown so much," Sarah whispered, her arms wrapping tight around them. She looked at Jackson, her face pale but resolute. "I shouldn't be here. They're watching anyone who worked with Eleanor. But when I heard you had the girls, I knew I couldn't stay silent." She sat, twisting her hands together before pulling a small flash drive from her pocket. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Dr. Porter gave me this the day before her accident. She called it her life insurance. If anything happened, I was supposed to release it. But I was too afraid. Bennett has connections everywhere. FDA, police, even the media. I thought I was protecting myself. Now I realize I've only been protecting him." Jackson took the drive, his chest heavy. "What's on it?" "Raw data from the Neurolin trials. Records that proved the deaths were hidden. Patients recoded under different causes. Emails from Bennett himself ordering the manipulation. And," Sarah's voice cracked, "and warnings about a pediatric version they were preparing. The risks for children are even higher." Emma clutched the edge of the notebook, her voice firm despite her youth. "Mom knew she might not survive. That's why she left us clues." Sarah looked at her with startled eyes. "She told me once she had a nuclear option, something that would destroy Bennett completely if he tried to silence her. But she never told me what it was." Jackson exchanged a glance with Camilla. The words felt like a key turning in the lock of the mysteries Eleanor had left behind. The key. White room Emma dreamed of, the notebook filled with puzzles, the hidden evidence, all of it pointed to one conclusion. Eleanor hadn't been silenced. She had been taken. Sarah lowered her voice further. "She disappeared the night before. She was scheduled to meet an investigative reporter. She left the girls at school and never came back. I believe the accident was staged. I believe Bennett is keeping her alive, forcing her to continue her work. The room grew quiet, the only sound the hum of the city outside. Jackson looked at Emma and Olivia, their small faces lifted toward him with faith that felt heavier than any fortune he had ever built. He closed the notebook slowly, his voice steady but low. Then we find her. Wherever that white room is, we'll tear it apart to bring her home. The night pressed heavy against the mountains, a moonless sky draped in clouds, the air sharp with the scent of pine. Jackson crouched in the shadow of a jagged ridge, the cold stone biting through his gloves. Below him, nestled against the dark slope, was no rustic retreat but a fortress disguised as one. A sprawling complex carved into the rock, its warm lights glowing faintly behind glass facades that pretended to be a luxury lodge. The real architecture was beneath, hidden in layers of reinforced steel and concrete, where Eleanor was said to be imprisoned. He had studied the blueprints Victoria Coldwell had handed over, memorized every corridor, every access point. The betrayal in her eyes when she admitted Bennett's plan had been almost convincing. She had chosen survival, not loyalty, and Jackson had seized the opportunity. Still, as he lay there, he wondered how many lives Eleanor's brilliance had been twisted to serve while locked in that white room. The thought tightened his jaw until he tasted blood where his teeth pressed against his cheek. Camilla's voice crackled softly through the encrypted earpiece. Perimeter has 22 guards, armed but routine. They don't expect company. Team Alpha in position. Give the word. Jackson glanced behind him. His security team, men and women drawn from the shadows of special forces and intelligence, waited with disciplined patience. They were here not for money, not for corporate loyalty, but because their commander had asked. Jackson's voice was steady when he answered. We move. Remember, objective is extraction. Eleanor comes out alive. Nothing else matters. The bye. Descent was swift and silent. They moved like wraiths, shadows slipping from one outcrop to the next. The first pair of guards never saw them, dropped with tranquilizer darts that hissed through the night. Jackson's boots struck the soft earth outside the complex, his heart hammering with the knowledge that just beyond those walls, Eleanor might be alive, breathing, waiting. The entrance was elegant wood and stone, but the moment Camilla touched the hidden panel with the bypass codes, the illusion fell away. Pneumatic locks released with a hiss, and the doors slid open to reveal sterile corridors gleaming under harsh white light. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and metal. Their footfalls echoed faintly, swallowed quickly by the hum of hidden machinery. They moved quickly, neutralizing guards with silent strikes. Every step deeper into the complex fed the coil of fear inside Jackson's chest. What if he was too late? What if the twins' hope had been nothing more than a dream he had let himself believe because he needed redemption? Then, through a pane of reinforced glass, he saw her. Eleanor sat at a laboratory bench, her hair tied back, her face paler and thinner than he remembered, but unmistakably hers. She moved with precision, her hands steady despite the fatigue that clung to her frame. A guard leaned lazily at the door, bored, unaware that the world was about to change. Jackson's breath caught. 10 years of grief shattered in that single sight. He pressed his palm against the glass before he could stop himself, as if the gesture might bridge the years, the lies, the prison she had been trapped in. On my mark, he whispered into the comm. The breach was clean. A flash grenade. Of light and sound, the guard subdued before he could fire. The door swung open. Eleanor looked up, her eyes widening, confusion flashing into disbelief. Jackson! Her voice was hoarse, fragile, but filled with a recognition that made his chest ache. He crossed the room in 3 strides. It's me. We're here to take you home. For a heartbeat, she just stared, as if waiting for the illusion to dissolve. Then tears filled her eyes. Her hand trembled as it reached for his, cold fingers curling into his palm. The girls, are they safe? They're safe, he said, gripping her hand as though he could never let go again. And they never stopped believing you were alive. They sent me to find you. The alarm klaxons blared then, harsh and deafening, painting the sterile walls with red light. Camilla's voice cut through the chaos. Perimeter breached. Hostiles. Incoming. FBI en route, but we've got company. Jackson drew Eleanor close, his arm around her thin shoulders. Stay with me, he told her. Whatever happens, I'm not losing you again. Gunfire erupted somewhere deeper in the complex. The rescue was no longer quiet. The war for Eleanor's freedom had begun. The corridors thundered with chaos. Alarms wailed like sirens of war, echoing through the steel belly of the mountain facility. Red light pulsed across the walls, throwing long shadows as Jackson led Eleanor through the labyrinth of hallways. She stumbled once, her body weakened from months, years of captivity, but his arm steadied her instantly. Behind them, Camilla and two of his operatives formed a tight shield, weapons raised, eyes sharp. Every corner carried danger, every flicker of movement a potential ambush. They burst through a heavy security door and climbed the stairwell toward the upper levels. Gunfire rattled in the distance, shouts muffled by the reinforced walls. The ground trembled with the approach of vehicles outside. Jackson's earpiece crackled with Camilla's voice. FBI has breached the perimeter. Bennett's reinforcements are trying to fight both sides. We've got a window if we move fast. Jackson glanced at Eleanor. Her face was pale, sweat glistening on her temple, but her eyes, those fierce, intelligent eyes, were alive. Stay with me, he whispered. She nodded once, determination hardening her features. At the top of the stairwell, they emerged into chaos. Agents in tactical gear pressed Bennett's guards against walls, shouting commands. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic tang of spent ammunition. And then, through the haze, Jackson saw him. Maxwell Bennett stood at the far end of the corridor, his hands restrained behind his back, flanked by two FBI agents. Even in cuffs, he carried himself with arrogance, his silver hair immaculate, his smile cold and unbroken. His gaze swept the room until it landed on Eleanor. For a flicker of a moment, the mask slipped. Shock rippled across his features. "You ungrateful woman!" Bennett spat, his voice rising above the chaos. "I gave you everything, protection, purpose. And this is how you repay me?" Eleanor stopped, her hand tightening around Jackson's. For the first time since her rescue, her voice carried the fire of the woman he once knew. "You falsified data. You endangered thousands of lives. You separated me from my children. There's nothing you ever gave me worth keeping." Bennett sneered, his charm stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. "Do you think they'll believe you? Do you think the world will care about one? Scientists whining when I've built an empire?" Jackson stepped forward, his voice low, lethal. "The world will believe the evidence you couldn't burn. It's already out there. Your empire is finished." The FBI agents shoved Bennett forward, dragging him toward the waiting transport. He struggled against their grip, shouting, "This isn't over, Hayes. You'll regret crossing me." The children, "Enough!" Eleanor's voice cut through like a blade. The fury in her eyes silenced him, and for a brief moment even the agents paused. She stood taller now, her frailness eclipsed by her strength. "You will never touch them again." As Bennett was hauled away, his voice faded into the clamor of boots and shouted orders. Jackson felt Eleanor sag against him, the weight of what had just happened sinking into her bones. He held her firmly, pressing his forehead against hers for a fleeting moment, as if anchoring them both. Hours later, the sun was just beginning to crest over the skyline when the elevator doors of Jackson's penthouse slid open. Martha stood waiting in the living room, the twins beside her in pajamas, their faces pale with anticipation. The air seemed to freeze as Eleanor stepped inside. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Olivia gave a broken cry, half disbelief, half joy, and ran forward. Emma followed, her usually calm face crumbling into tears. Eleanor dropped to her knees, arms wide, and the girls collided into her embrace. The sound of their sobs filled the room, raw and unrestrained. A sound that broke something inside Jackson even as it mended everything else. "My babies," Eleanor whispered, kissing their hair, holding them as though she could never let go. "I'm here. I'm really here." Jackson stood back, his vision blurred, his chest tight. For years he had believed this impossible, had mourned at an empty grave while raising towers of steel and glass to bury his grief. Now, against all odds, they were together. Emma lifted her tear-streaked face and looked at him. "You brought her back," she said simply. Jackson knelt beside them, placing a hand on Eleanor's shoulder, his other hand covering Olivia's small one. "We brought her back," he said, voice thick. "All of us. Because none of us gave up." Eleanor turned her face to him, eyes glistening. In them he saw pain, yes, but also gratitude, recognition, and something else, something long buried but not extinguished. The weight of years of separation, of lies and manipulation, hung between them, but in that moment it no longer defined them. The fall of Maxwell Bennett was beginning. The rise of something stronger, a family reforged in fire and truth, had already arrived. The morning light filled the penthouse, soft and golden, pouring through the tall windows as though the world itself was trying to wash away the years of shadow that had hung over this family. Eleanor sat curled on the couch with both girls pressed tightly against her, their small hands clinging to her as if any loosening of grip might pull her back into the nightmare they had lived without her. Jackson stood a few feet away, one hand resting on the edge of the marble counter, his body taut, his mind whirring with questions he had buried for years. The reunion had been too fragile last night to ask, too raw. He had simply allowed them the comfort of being whole again. But now, with Bennett behind bars and the room filled with the heavy silence of things unsaid, Jackson knew the truth could no longer wait. Eleanor lifted her face, pale and tired, but her eyes met his steadily. "You deserve to know," she said softly. The tremor in her voice was not fear, it was exhaustion, the weight of memories clawing their way to the surface. Jackson's jaw flexed. "Why didn't you come back? Why did you let me believe you were dead?" The words cut the air like a blade, but they were not shouted. They were too heavy, too broken to be anything but whispered. The twins' heads turned toward their mother, curiosity and pain mingling in their gaze. Eleanor smoothed Olivia's hair, kissed Emma's temple, then gently urged them toward Martha, who guided them into the kitchen with a reassuring hand. The girls lingered at the doorway, their wide eyes refusing to leave her until Martha coaxed them away with promises of pancakes. Eleanor's hands trembled as she folded them in her lap. "I didn't let you believe I was dead. Bennett made you believe it." Jackson's pulse thundered in his ears. He took a step closer, but his chest felt like it was caving in. "Explain." She drew a shaky breath, her gaze dropping to the rug as if the patterns might anchor her. "Years ago, I discovered what he was doing, funding secret programs, falsifying data, creating chemical compounds that could never pass safety regulations. He needed me because I understood the formulas better than anyone else, but I refused to sign off on the lies. That's when he made his move. He threatened the girls. He threatened you." Her voice cracked, and she looked up, tears spilling freely now. "He staged the accident. He left a body, a ring, just enough to break you. He thought if you grieved me, if the world buried me, then no one would question my silence. And he was right. For years I lived in a locked compound, forced to work under his watch. Every time I tried to resist, he showed me pictures of you, of the children. He made me believe one wrong step would kill you all. Jackson's breath caught. His fingers curled into fists, his knuckles white. The anger surged like wildfire, but it collided with something stronger, the image of her suffering in silence, carrying the weight of protecting them alone. You endured all of that? For us? Her nod was almost imperceptible, but the truth in her eyes roared louder than any word. I counted every sunrise, Jackson. I clung to the memory of your voice, the way you held the girls when they were small. That memory was the only weapon I had. It kept me alive. It kept me sane. Piatti. Floor seemed to tilt beneath him. Years of rage, confusion, and loneliness rushed back in a flood, but alongside it came something unexpected: relief. She had not abandoned them. She had fought for them, suffered for them, sacrificed her freedom for their safety. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt before her, his hands grasping hers, pulling them against his chest. His voice was ragged. You should have told me. We could have fought together. She touched his cheek with trembling fingers, her lips curving in the faintest, saddest smile. If I had tried, he would have taken the girls. You know he would have. I chose the pain I could bear, not the one I couldn't. Jackson closed his eyes, a single tear breaking free. For the first time in years, the grief in his chest shifted, not gone, but transformed, softened by truth. Eleanor leaned into him, her forehead pressing against his. It's over now, she whispered. But he's not finished. Maxwell Bennett built too much to let it all collapse without dragging us down with him. His reach is deeper than the FBI knows. They don't realize what he's capable of. Jackson pulled back, his eyes locking onto hers, steel and fire burning in his gaze. Then we'll be ready. This time, you're not alone, not ever again. She nodded, but the shadows in her eyes lingered, a silent warning that the storm was far from over. And as Jackson held her hand, he realized that the shocking truth was not just about her survival. It was about the war that had only just begun. The courtroom's tall windows poured a pale winter light across the polished floor, a light that made every scuff, every footprint, every anxious breath feel exposed. Jackson sat at the plaintiff's table with Eleanor's hand in his, feeling the small tremor that ran through her fingers and up into his chest. Emma and Olivia were in the second row beside Martha, their legs swinging nervously above the carpet. 2 small anchors holding down a sky full of lightning. Cameras hummed. In the hallway, reporters whispered like a tide beyond the doors. Inside, the world narrowed to a judge's gavel, a jury's still faces, and a man in a dark suit who stared at them with an easy, practiced smile. Maxwell Bennett looked rested. He always did. Even in a criminal trial that had gutted his empire and left his name smoldering in the news, he managed poise, silver hair immaculate, a tie the color of fresh bruises. He leaned occasionally toward his attorney with a little tilt of the head that said, quietly, "We are above this." Jackson felt the pulse in his throat rise, then drop, then steady as he looked away from Bennett and back to Eleanor. He squeezed. Once. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Special Agent Rivera's testimony came clean as a blade. The mountain facility, the coated shell companies, the transports that never appeared on any ledger. Detective Lewis followed with receipts that tracked payments to the driver who had lost control the day of the staged crash, with analysis that unraveled the rush job coroner's report. Then Diana Chen, steady as a metronome, laid out dates and documents, an artery of corroboration that could not be pinched shut. Through it all, Bennett's expression didn't flicker. When the defense cross-examined, they landed blows where they could. Chain of custody, alleged bias, the suggestion that a tech billionaire had engineered a media coup to topple a pharmaceutical. Titan for profit. Your Honor, Bennett's attorney said, voice smooth as silk. This entire narrative hinges on the word of a woman whose trauma has regrettably clouded her memory, and on data files that, by the government's own admission, were accessed through questionable means. Jackson bristled, but Eleanor didn't flinch. When she took the stand, the room's background noise seemed to recede. She spoke not as a victim, but as a scientist. Each sentence precise, each explanation a bridge the jury could cross. She showed how the graphs had been bent until they lied, how the cardiac fatalities had been relabeled to hide in plain sight. When the defense pressed, she did not break. Only when they asked why she had not come forward sooner did her voice waver, just once, as she said, "Because he told me that if I tried, my daughters would not live to see the result." A murmur ran through the gallery. The judge's gavel summoned silence. The defense attorney's mouth tightened. "Is there any verifiable evidence, Dr. Porter, aside from your statement that Mr. Bennett issued such a threat?" For the first time all morning, Bennett looked at Eleanor directly. Something like anticipation warmed his eyes. Jackson felt the trap in the question, a technical noose, a way to paint fear as hysteria, to transmute a fortress of facts into the soft clay of conjecture, and felt rage taste metallic at the back of his tongue. Before Eleanor could answer, the courtroom doors swung open. Camilla slipped inside with a laptop tucked against her side, her hair still damp from the storm outside. She caught Jackson's eye, and the slightest nod passed between them like a spark. The judge frowned. "Counsel?" "Your Honor," Diana rose from the second row, stepping into the aisle. "We request the court's indulgence to enter supplemental evidence. Its provenance has just been confirmed by federal technologists in chambers." Bennett's attorney stood. "Objection." "Surprise evidence is," Rivera lifted a document from her case. "We have the warrant, Your Honor." A pause, thin as wire. The judge gestured. "Proceed." Camilla connected the laptop to the courtroom screen with fingers quick and sure. The display bloomed blue, then black, then resolved into crisp monochrome. Footage, the timestamp blinking from a date 6 months before the staged crash. The angle was slightly low, as if the camera had been disguised inside a vent. Bennett's office, the same brutal elegance he wore like a suit. Bennett walked in. Sleeves rolled, tie loosened, irritation sharpening his movements. Victoria Coldwell followed, pale, careful. The audio crackled to life. Bennett's voice filled the court. "We're done coddling her, Victoria. She signs off on the redraft or she disappears. If she runs to the press, you know the drill. Manufacture an exit, permanent if necessary. Handle the children." No one moved. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim. Victoria's voice, a tremor she tried to hide. "The optics are my concern, not yours." Bennett leaned across his desk. "We carry the world on our backs so fools can live longer, and they pay us by counting our steps. I will not have my legacy audited by a sentimental lab rat." The video ended with the small click of a door. The screen went black. For a long moment, there was only the brittle sound of breath. Then the courtroom burst into noise. Reporters lunging for their phones, a juror's sharp intake, the defense attorney's strangled objection. The judge's gavel hammered order out of chaos. Rivera spoke first, voice steady. The file came from a dead-drop server seated by Dr. Porter. The access key was a multi-part cipher, 2 elements in her lab notes, and the third hidden in an object belonging to her daughters. The agents can testify to chain of custody. Emma's hand latched onto Olivia's as both girls looked at their mother, eyes wide. Later, Jackson would learn that the object was as simple as a shoelace aglet, hollowed and sealed. Something a child would never surrender, something no man like Bennett would ever think to search. Eleanor had not only planned for the truth to outlast her, she had built the truth into the ordinary, into the daily act of children tying their shoes. The defense tried to rise and drown the moment in procedure. It didn't take. The judge allowed the footage. The jury watched it again, then once more, their faces transforming not with outrage, but with that more dangerous human expression. Recognition. The mask was off. The shape beneath was simple. By afternoon, the verdict felt less like a decision and more like gravity. Guilty on the counts that mattered most. Sentencing deferred. Bail revoked. Bennett's jaw worked soundlessly when the cuffs closed. The poise drained away, leaving a man whose godhood fit him less convincingly than he had believed. He turned. Once, instinct pulling his gaze toward Eleanor, toward the twins, toward Jackson, toward the world he had tried to orchestrate like a symphony, and found only the unadorned fact of their survival. There was, at last, nothing left to say. Outside, the sky had cleared. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones thrust forward, questions striking like hailstones. Jackson shielded the twins with his arm as they moved through the crowd. A voice broke the din. "Mr. Hayes, Dr. Porter, what happens now?" Eleanor paused. The cameras leaned in. "Now," she said, "we build the thing we nearly lost." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Weeks unfolded into gentler rhythms. The FBI spread its net across the world Bennett had spun, finding anchor points where he'd thought there were none. Hospitals began revising protocols. Journals issued retractions with apologies that read like confessions, and a phrase that started as a whisper in a policy memo threaded its way into the culture of medicine. Transparency first. At the seaside, cottage. The ocean resumed its patient conversations with the shore. The twins learned to sleep through the whole night without keeping a light on. One evening, the four of them trudged along the damp sand while a gull stitched slow arcs through. The wind. The girls ran ahead, arguing over the architecture of a new sand city. Emma precise, Olivia exuberant, their differences fitting like hands. Eleanor tucked her arm through Jackson's. The air smelled of salt and sun-warmed wood. "I keep waiting to wake up in that room," she murmured. "You won't," he said. "But if you do, we'll break the door again." She smiled at that, quiet and luminous. "There's something else," she said, and stopped, turning to face him with the same fearless honesty she'd had in the lab years ago. "I don't want our life to be only a reaction to what he did. I want it to be a choice. I want us to choose." He stood there for a heartbeat, listening to the wind, to the girls' laughter, to the steady knock of his own heart. Then he dropped to one knee in the sand, not with spectacle, but with a certainty that felt like standing in sunlight after a long winter. He didn't make a speech. He simply opened his palm to show her a ring, not ostentatious, but true. A deep, blue stone that caught the last light of the day. "For the years we lost," he said, "and the years we won back." Her breath caught, eyes bright. She didn't answer with words. She held out her hand and let him slide the ring onto it, then pulled him to his feet and kissed him while the ocean clapped its slow, approving hands. Somewhere behind them, two conspirators shrieked with delight and sprinted over, both trying to talk at once, both failing and choosing laughter instead. Later, at the cottage table, they wrote the first pages of a new charter on unlined paper. A foundation dedicated to ethical science and unbreakable transparency, research funded not by what could be hidden, but by what must be known. They named it not after either of them, but after the idea that had saved them, after the ordinary courage of children who would not abandon the truth. The twins signed last, solemn and proud, their letters angular and a little too large, the ink drying into a promise. On a gray morning not long after, they returned to the cemetery where everything had started and everything had been undone. The headstone was gone, the plot returned to grass, the lie uprooted. They stood where the marble had stood and set down daisies instead of roses. "Not a grave," Emma said softly. A place where a story turned? They lingered a while, saying nothing. Then they walked back to the car, hand in hand in hand, the four of them, a shape the world had tried to break and failed to understand. The wind moved through the oaks with a sound like pages turning. The city breathed. Somewhere far behind them, the mountain facility sat empty, its lights cold, its doors open to air. And ahead, only ahead, the long, bright road of an ordinary day waited, made extraordinary by the simple, shocking fact of being theirs.